Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door for the Nintendo Switch. I can't believe we're actually in a timeline where I can say that, and it's not a joke. Before we begin the review, I'd like to thank two other YouTubers for helping me out with the thumbnail. Thank you to Ty the One-Up Guy for drawing the paper paw, and thank you Esabelle for arranging the paper paw into the appropriate background and resizing the game's title. I will have a link to both of their channels in the description. I love pretty much all of the videos they do, so please go and support them if you have a chance. Usually when I do reviews of remakes, I like to start out with the changes to see if you have the original game, would you like to double dip and buy the remake? In this case, however, I'm just going to say even if you do have the original game, please buy the remake, because corporations really only listen to money and profit. And if this game does well, then we'll get more Paper Mario games that are more of this style of deep character designs and interesting lore and complex mechanics without all the generic stuff that Sticker Star did. So please go buy this. The change that I think most people are going to be asking about is, what did they do about the backtracking? Because most people, including myself, thought that the backtracking was probably the biggest issue with the original Thousand-Year Door. And it's sort of been addressed. There is a new room in Rogueport Sewers that you can access after Chapter 1 that has a warp pipe per chapter that lets you return to all of those major areas. And there are a handful of areas where there's like a new warp pipe that takes you to an area you've already been to, or a spring that lets you bypass a particularly tricky jump. But there are still quite a lot of instances in the individual chapters where you do have to go back and forth quite a lot. And there still isn't a spin dash option like in Paper Mario 1, and it's not until Chapter 3 that you get an ability to walk faster, so it can be a bit of a drag, but at the very least, side quests and main quests that involve you going between areas, between chapters, are significantly smoother now that everything is in a much more streamlined fashion, and the rooms aren't that bizarre configuration that they were in the original Thousand-Year Door. It's also nice that every single chapter gets a warp pipe leading to it. You don't have wild exceptions like in the original game, and you don't have to worry about unskippable cutscenes, because a lot of the annoying bits that dragged on can actually now be skipped. There's a partner ring that appears when you hold down the L button that lets you quickly swap between partners without going into the menu. That was a weird omission from Paper Mario 1 that never made it over to the original Paper Mario 2, so I'm glad that it's, in a sense, restored. You can press the left trigger to get a hint from Goombella as to where to go next, just in case you're stuck. There are two new characters, the Battle Master, who is a purple toad that appears in nearly every major area, and he will let you practice action commands, including super guarding, which that wasn't in the original game, so thank you for that. The other new character is Ian Fumus, which I believe is a play on words of both Infomouse and Infamous. He appears in the Trouble Center, which is the area where the side quests are given to you. And some of those side quests can be a bit vague, so you can pay him a couple of coins for him to guide you along the way in the side quests. So you get advice on the main quest for free, then you get advice on the side quests for money. Seems a bit weird, but it's nice that they have that option, in addition to being able to go to the fortune teller, and in addition to the character of Waki, who you can pay to get information. So there's a lot of ways to get information in the original game, and now there's even more. The graphics and the music have been overhauled magnificently. The game now looks closer to how Origami King did, while still preserving the artistic vision of the original game. It doesn't have the weird white outlines around the characters. They feel like they're made more out of cardboard paper than just the wavy paper like the later Paper Mario games were. And it honestly is one of the best looking games on the Switch. The lighting is incredible. Some of the textures have been completely redone from the ground up, so that I would call this more of a remake than a remaster, because they didn't just upscale the visuals. They flat out redesigned pretty much everything, and it looks absolutely spectacular. The music also deserves special mention, because every single track has been completely rearranged, and a lot of them are now performed by real instruments. There are also new tracks and new variations of music. So for example, in the original game there was only one standard battle theme, but now every chapter and sometimes different areas within a chapter will have a different battle theme depending on the context. So when you're in the castle, for example, you'll hear more of a spooky rendition, or say when you get later in the game it'll get more intense. And you also have theme songs for various characters, whereas it would have just been the standard background music playing in the original. And most of these new theme songs are performed by real instruments. And no, I'm not just reaching for it. It says in the credits who played each individual instrument, so I can personally vouch, yes, the real instrument treatment that started in Sticker Star is back. So I am not one of those people that says ditch everything in Sticker Star, Color Splash, and Origami King. Some of those games had good elements, and I'm glad to see that some of them are preserved here in Thousand Year Door. In fact, they were preserved so well that I would dare say the soundtrack went from I hated the original soundtrack, now I love the remastered one. But speaking of that, if you don't like the rearranged soundtrack, there's a new badge called Nostalgia Tunes that you can buy in the badge shop for a measly 1 coin, and if you equip it, it reverts the music back to the GameCube original. I have no idea why you would want to, though. The GameCube synthesizers just don't do it for me. At the most, there were some tracks that were okay, but not a single one of them wowed me. But now, I'm debating over which ones I should show my best friend to maximize the time that we have together. That's how amazing this new soundtrack is. Overall, it has more of a triumphant, celebratory vibe, almost as if Nintendo is saying, Paper Mario is back to the classic style, baby, and we're gonna make the music reflect that change. The characters are considerably more expressive than they used to be. Most of the time in the original game, you would just see like an exclamation mark pop up and the characters would bounce in place or slightly open their mouths. But now they have different expressions for different emotions. The partners have back sprites so that when you're walking away from the screen, they'll actually turn away. In the original, only Mario did that. But now that the partners do it as well, it feels like all the characters are more unified. There are more scenes where all of Mario's partners will be standing out instead of just the one that you have equipped. Even Mario feels more alive because he'll do more gestures with his hands than just the generic, almost Hitlerish pose that he did in the original version. In fact, it looked so much like a Hitler pose that in some regions, the original Thousand Year Door censored that. Now, all regions get the censorship treatment. Speaking of which, there are a handful of scenes where the dialogue has been slightly tweaked so that it either matches the Japanese original more or is more politically correct. Thankfully, they kept in a few of the slogans, like one of the bad guys still says crud, which was such a 2004 slang. But like anytime the characters will say insults such as lame, lunatic, or insane, those were all removed. A certain character's sexual identity has been changed, but we will discuss that in its own Catholic review. There's now an art gallery and a soundtrack player that you can unlock by collecting all of the shine sprites in a chapter for the songs and all the star pieces in a chapter for the art pieces. Personally, I'm really glad that they chose the shine sprites as the requirements for unlocking the songs, because I don't really like to see art pieces in video games. I like their inclusion, but I'm not going to be upset if they're not there, because to me, I don't want to know how something used to look, because I might think, why didn't they keep that design? That looks so much better than the final product. But I love it when games have in-game soundtrack players. I hope that's actually the norm on Nintendo's next system. And it's amazing to be able to re-experience a lot of these songs, especially ones that only show up once in the game, and to be able to listen to them whenever. Especially since the Switch is portable, now I can show it to my friends, and that's super amazing, because now I don't have to have an internet connection to pull up YouTube. One thing that they didn't change, though, was the voice acting, which means that we get the return of...
Hello, I'm a Mario. Let's make a pizza pie together. You go get some sausage. I'm gonna get some... You chase me the pizza. If you catch me the pizza, I'm gonna eat the pizza. We're gonna make a lasagna.
Yep, you heard that right. Charles Martinet is back as the voice of Mario. But not just him. We also have Jen Taylor and Scott Burns as Peach and Bowser, respectively. None of them recorded any new lines for the project. In fact, I actually met Jen Taylor this year at Comic-Con, and she was kind of surprised that they were doing that for the Thousand Year Door remake, so that doubly confirms it. But it is very nice to see in a world where all three of them have moved on from their roles as Mario, Peach, and Bowser, their work is still being preserved for this remake, and they're not just recasting the roles and re-recording all of the dialogue. So, in that respect, it's very faithful to the original, and I commend the team for showing restraint in that area. Those are most of the major changes that were not related to spoilers, so let's move into what is Thousand Year Door. However, I'm going to approach it a little bit differently than I did in my second review, which is the re-review. My original review was deleted because it's terrible. But because this is the third time I've reviewed the game, I don't want to go as in-depth as I did in the re-review. I just want to express my thoughts on the game overall, what it means for the future of Mario RPGs. I know it sounds more in-depth than it is, but trust me, this is still going to be a review. One thing that most diehard fans of the original Paper Mario games, including myself, lamented at from Sticker Star onward is that it seemed like Nintendo was so desperate to make sure Mario felt safe that it ended up making Mario not feel as cool as he used to. To put it into perspective, Thousand Year Door opens up with a now fully animated cutscene that was originally just pages in a book that talks about an ancient demon that destroyed a town, and now the town that you're in is on the ruins of an abandoned town. Like, that's cool. It makes Mario seem like he's on the same level as, like, say, the Avengers in terms of what he can take on. But then the later games were like, hey, let's have Mario take on Scissors. Woo! That's even more powerful than Thanos. I personally am really glad to see that Nintendo is acknowledging that overly adhering to paper and overusing toads and not enough expression is just kind of a stupid decision. I like how Thousand Year Door is back to there being, say, gender expressions on characters. The characters don't have to over-rely on paper jokes. There are still a few here, like Mario can turn into various different shapes that are based on papery form. Sometimes there are paper effects. But for the most part, the humor is simply funny because it matches the situation, and it adds a sense of whimsy to a tale that's actually surprisingly dark. I like how there's so much lore that you can find that I didn't notice in my original walkthrough. I watched a YouTube video called Thousand Year Door Designed for Storytelling, and that made me realize, dang, I know Super Paper Mario is the one that has the deep story, but this game isn't too far behind if you know where to look. Another thing to keep in mind about Paper Mario 2 is that around 2019, YouTuber Arlo created a petition to get Thousand Year Door remastered, and I signed that petition. Because while I think Origami King had its moments, it still suffered from trying too hard to make sure that the characters were generic and everything was reliant on paper, and it didn't feel as cool as the Mario RPGs. Like I said, there were some things about them that I liked. Like, I liked the music of Origami King. I liked how the partners' narratives were handled, even if I think the execution in battle was a bit flimsy. But overall, I didn't think it was a good idea for Nintendo to try too hard to damage control the Mario brand. I wish they would have just been more willing to experiment, but not like experiment for experiment's sake. Like, Mario went into some wacky situations, sure, but he made sure that the gameplay was solid, the story was solid. He didn't try to have to adhere to any crazy uppity rules from the higher-ups. They just said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if Mario could take on this kind of a threat? And coolness is the word that I would describe Thousand Year Door. There's a lot of scenarios where it's just so amazing to see Mario in this type of environment rather than just boring old platforming like he started out in. I think the RPG mechanics worked really well to start out simple and then work their way up to being more and more complex. In the footage I'm showing, you might get the impression that the game is boring and repetitive, but that's because it's still teaching you how to play the game. The original Paper Mario was designed on the premise of let's take a complicated genre, turn-based RPGs, and simplifying it while having enough depth for advanced players. Now, where Origami King, Sticker Star, and Color Splash failed is that they introduced systems that were already complicated, that just kept getting more and more complicated. Whereas Thousand Year Door is a simple system to learn. You attack at like single digits for the enemies, you have like jump, hammer, items, and eventually special moves, and that's it. And the action commands are really easy to execute. It's like a perfect My First RPG. Of course, since this is Paper Mario 2, it incorporated new elements to take advantage of the GameCube's horsepower, like having an audience that cheered for you, being able to do stylish moves to make your star power go up faster because you're pleasing the audience more, having the partners have a bit more narrative to them instead of just kind of being there like they were in the original game. The GameCube was one of the biggest leaps in horsepower that Nintendo has ever had. And it really showed in Paper Mario 2, because at first glance you could say it's just a prettier Paper Mario 1, but there were so many things that it did better. And you could argue the later Paper Mario games did that, but they also took a step backwards in terms of everything else. Sure, the music and the graphics were phenomenal, but everything else was so standard and safe. And I'm glad to see Nintendo is returning to an era where they're willing to just make Mario as weird and wacky and creative and cool at the same time. So my feelings on this remake are extremely positive. Sure, you could argue that it's the same old game from the GameCube era with not a whole lot of new content to find. It's just touched up and has a couple of quality of life improvements. But boy, does it look good, sound good, and feel good to know that we're back in this kind of era. And if this is a remake, I can only imagine how much Nintendo might be willing to push a brand new Paper Mario game in this kind of style now that they know that this is what we want. Now, to be fair, I do think that some of the elements of the later Paper Mario games deserve to stay. I think the way they handle partners is better in storytelling than Thousand Year Doors, for example. So if they could incorporate a way to make the partners both functional in battle and have good story execution, then I'd be sold. Overall, it's just got to be good, it's got to be cool, and it's got to be easy to learn, hard to master, and with a good story. And I'm so pleased that this remake exists. Thank you very much, Arlo, for creating the petition that allowed us to get this gem of a game. Thank you, Nintendo, for being willing to actually listen to the fans. And before you think that I'm reaching for it, in the credits, when it's listing all the different companies that they're thanking, one of the things they said was, "and you," in capital letters, making me wonder if that's their little subtle way of saying, yes, we did acknowledge the petition. You fans got what you wanted. I ended up buying this game. I didn't even bother renting it from Gameplay. I went ahead and bought it, the whole $60. And even if I think that's a bit steep for a story that's 20 years old, it's a quality story, except for Chapter 2, but even then, there's a couple of quality of life improvements to make it a bit better than it was on the GameCube. As much as it pains me to ask that much money for a game that's still more or less 20 years old, at the same time, if it makes Nintendo listen, then I think it might be worth the asking price. And this is a pretty long game, too. It's got 8 chapters. There's probably a post-game that I haven't discovered, but I don't want to talk about that for fear of spoilers. The graphics and music are utterly phenomenal, and I think it's one of the $60 remasters that actually feels like it earns the asking price, unlike something like New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. This review has been more of just a celebration of being back to goodness. If you want a simple, to-the-point analysis, Thousand Year Door is a My First RPG that is also very cool. It has a spectacular battle system, wonderful music, phenomenal storytelling, amazing characters, and plenty of quality of life improvements to make this easily the definitive version. I only really have 2 nitpicks about this remake. One is that an early scene where Goombas were catcalling a female Goomba has now been changed to complaining about trespassing. It kind of lacks the everyone is an idiot vibe that Rogueport is supposed to give off. And there's also the fact that dialogue can't be skipped through, as it could in the original. Now you have to wait for the characters to finish talking in their new Banjo-Kazooie gibberish to be able to proceed, which really stunk when I was trying to capture footage for this, because I was like, hurry up, I'm trying to get to the gameplay, not the writing. Also, sometimes things take a bit longer to do, sometimes the battles have awkward pauses that weren't there in the original game, but apart from those 3 little nitpicks, Thousand Year Door is amazing. And I hope you guys will love it just as much as I did. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, go follow Esabelle and Ty the One-Up Guy. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!